Now, this is going to be a story about some fantastic men. Each one can do something extremely well. And his name comes from the Spanish word for what he can do so well. There's a man who can run really fast. His name is Corrin Corron, because corre means run in Spanish. There's a man who's so strong he can carry anything. His name is Cargin Cargon. Carga means carry something heavy, like the word cargo in English. There's a man who can shoot so straight, he never misses anything he's shooting at. He is tirin tiron. Tira means shoot. And then there's a man who can listen so well, he hears everything. His name is Escuchin Escuchon. Escucha means listen. But none of those men will be the hero of the story. The hero of the story is a young man whose father was a king and whose mother was a queen. Of course, that makes him a prince. But then his father died and his mother died, so you might expect him to become the king. But in that land there was a law which said you had to be married to be the king. He didn't have a wife. But then he heard about a king in a faraway country who had a beautiful daughter. He thought he would go there and see if she would marry him. First, he got together a lot of gold. He loaded 4 mules with gold, and then he started off on his long journey. He had been traveling for 3 days, and he came to a clearing among the trees. He saw a big man working with an axe, chopping firewood. The man had made 30 big stacks of firewood. But the prince looked all around and he didn't see any animals. There were no oxen or mules or burros to take the firewood home. He went up to the man and said, "How are you going to get this firewood home?" And the man looked at him and said, "What? Get it home? I can carry it home." "You can carry 30 stacks of firewood?" "Of course I can. My name is Cargin Cargon. I can carry anything." He picked up all 30 stacks of firewood on his shoulders and he carried them home. When the priest saw how strong the man was, he asked that man to work for him as a servant. He offered to pay him with gold. So Cargin Cargon became a servant of the prince, and they traveled along together. 3 days later, they came to a mountain. Sitting in front of the mountain was a man. But as they watched, the man jumped up and ran off in that direction. They had hardly blinked their eyes, and he came running back from that direction. They went up to him and said, "Did you really do what it looked like you did? Did you run clear around the mountain just like that?" He said, "Sure I did. My name is Corrin Corron. I can run faster than that if I want to." So the prince asked him to be his servant, and then they traveled along together, the prince Cargin Cargon and Corrin Corron. 3 days later, they saw a man with a rifle taking careful aim. But they looked all around. They couldn't see what he was going to shoot at. They went up to him and said, "What are you going to shoot?" He told them, "Oh, there's a fly sitting on a tree about 2 miles away. I'm going to shoot his left eye out. You can shoot that well? Yes, I can. My name is Tirin Tiron. I don't miss anything I shoot at. So the prince hired him to be his servant, and they traveled along together, the prince Karin Koron Korin Koron and Tirin Tiron. 3 days later, they saw a man lying with his ear against the ground, listening. They walked up quietly. They said, "What are you listening for?" He told them, "Shh, be quiet. Over in China, a woman dropped a needle on the ground. I can hear it bounce." "You can hear a needle drop on the other side of the world?" "Yes, I can. My name is Escuchin Escuchon. I hear everything in this world, and in the other world too." So the prince hired him to be his servant, and they traveled along together. The prince Kagenkogon Korinkoron Tirin Tiron Escuchin Escuchon. And then 3 days later, they came to the faraway kingdom. But they found out that the king was very jealous. He didn't want any man to marry his daughter. If a man came there wanting to marry her, he would have to pass some very difficult tests. To start off with, he would have to run a race with the princess. She was a fast runner, and if he lost the race, the king would cut his feet off. Already 200 young men had lost their feet. But the prince went to the king and he said, "Oh, I'm not worried about the race at all. It will be so easy, I'll just let my servant run in my place." The king said, "Are you sure? My daughter is a very swift runner." "Oh, I'm not worried. My servant can just run in my place." So the next morning, you know who it was who stood there at the starting line. It was the runner, Corin Coron. The princess came to the starting line. The gun was sounded. They dashed off, and the princess was a fast runner, but nowhere near so fast as Corin Coron. He arrived at the distant mountain that was the halfway point of the race, and then he started back again. And then he looked over his shoulder. When he saw how far ahead he was, he thought he would sit down and rest for a while. Then he noticed a shady bush nearby. He stretched out in the shade, and he fell asleep. While he was sleeping, the princess came running along, and she saw him. She crept over there, and she took off his shoes. And then she picked some sharp thorns from the bush and put them down by his bare feet. And then she ran on. But Escuchin Escuchon was listening, and he could hear Corin Coron snoring. He went and told the shooter, Tirin Tiron. Tirin Tiron climbed a tree. He looked out, and he saw Corin Coron asleep. He aimed his rifle carefully. Pow! He shot the very tip of his ear, and he woke him up. Corin Coron jumped up, but as soon as he jumped up, he stepped on the thorns. He started howling, jumping around, holding his foot. But Tirin Tiron just shot some more. Pow! 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 He shot the thorns right out of his foot. Corin Coron ran on, and he crossed the finish line just ahead of the princess. The king said, "That is the first test. Here is the second one. You will have to guess the one very strange thing my daughter has about her person. If you can guess what it is, you can marry her. But if you fail, it will cost you your life." The prince went away thinking, "Oh no, what can it be? Maybe she has 6 toes on her feet. I don't know. Maybe she has a birthmark on her shoulder. Oh, what could it be?" And the princess was also unhappy, because she had really taken a liking to that prince. She was beginning to wish that she would end up marrying him. That night she said to her servant, "I'm so sad. My father said the prince has to guess that strange thing I have about me. Nobody could ever guess it." The servant said, "Oh no, you mean he has to guess that you have?" And she said what it was, and who should be listening but Escuchin Escuchon. He went and told the prince. The next morning the prince appeared before the king. First he tried all the other things you might guess. He said, "Oh, maybe the princess has 6 toes on her right foot." The king laughed. "6 toes? No. Does she have a tattoo on her left elbow?" "A tattoo?" But then the prince said what Escuchin Escuchon had heard. The princess has a long hair growing out of the middle of her belly. It winds around and around her waist 10 times, and then it coils up and looks like a rose right in the middle of her back. The king said, "How did you know that?" And the princess also gasped. But there was a sparkle in her eye, because that's just what she was hoping she would hear. But still the king didn't want to lose his daughter. He said, "Please, don't take my daughter. I will give you anything. I'll give you all the gold you can carry." And the prince said, "Will you give me all the gold my servant can carry?" "I'll give you all the gold anyone can carry." So the prince went and talked to the strong man, Cargin Cargon. He told him to make a big sack out of leather. When the sack was finished, servants started carrying gold from the king's treasury and dumping it into the sack. 100 servants brought all the gold they could carry, but Cargin picked up the sack and spun it around his head. He said, "Oh, I think it's still empty. I don't feel anything in there." 100 more servants brought all the gold they could carry. He said, "Oh, it's still so light. Don't you have any more?" All the gold in the whole kingdom went into the sack. The only gold left was the king's crown. The king lifted the crown from his head. Then he looked at the prince and said, "Please, let me keep my crown. You may marry the princess." So the prince and the princess were married, and they returned to his land, and he was now the king, and the princess was the queen. And they lived happily for the rest of their lives. And the story does not say for sure, but I imagine those servants were pretty happy too. Wouldn't you be happy if you could do what they could do?